So now the 13th Amendment. In terms of the 13th Amendment, right, there's a lot you need to know. Okay, you need to know a lot in terms of the 13th Amendment. Now, there's a big explanation given in terms of the background here, how it came. Like, I'm just going to walk you through quickly, okay, as to what happened. Now, in the previous unit, especially in Unit 7, we saw that the British colonial rulers used divide and rule theory or as communal representation. So, and sort of to create like a friction between the Sinhalese, Tamil and Muslim communities in our country. Okay. So because of that, by early 1900s, the Sinhalese and the minorities, they weren't getting along really well. So as a result of that, we saw that the political leaders of Tamil political leaders breaking away from the national movement and forming their own Tamil Congress. And we saw by 1949, Mr. V. Chellanayakam formed a party called Ilanke Tamil Arasu Katchi. We saw this in Unit 13 when we were discussing the political party system of Sri Lanka, right? So basically their aim was to turn Sri Lanka into a federal country. Okay, and it didn't go out really well, right? In 72 constitution, things took like a really bad turn because they turned Sri Lanka, like they declared Sri Lanka as a federal, as a unitary country. The constitution did not have anything related to power devolution, and also the constitution completely ignored minority rights. Instead, they gave some useless fundamental rights. So as a result of that, by mid-70s, the Tamil youth groups were pushed to the level of taking arms to their hands, like becoming armed groups, saying that we are so done trying to get this the democratic way. Now it's time to fight and take what's ours. So LTT, plot, TELO, right? This should be TELO, EPRLF, all these were formed. You guys studied this for Unit 13, political party system, right? So by 1980s, of course, this had turned really bad, and you guys know the country faced a civil war. Okay, so in 1983, so by early 1980s, the Sri Lankan government had to send troops to northern province because these armed groups were sort of getting out of control. In 1983, a group of army soldiers died in Jaffna because their truck ran over a landmine. Okay, and this incident sort of like, this was like that one straw broke the camel's back. It was like that one incident that everything started erupting, and it created an outbreak within the Sinhalese community, and they started running a lot of hate crimes and massacre on Tamil civilians, right? And of course, the Sri Lankan government did not make sufficient measures to prevent these crimes. This is known as the Black July. In 1983, the Tamil massacre that was going on, it is known as the Black July. Okay. I have included in the note that the Sri Lankan government did not make sufficient measures. This is like a very nice way of saying what the government did, right? So unofficially, just to mention that accusations are there, it was actually the Sri Lankan government sort of aided what was going at that time, like the thugs who were working for the politicians and all that, they were the ones who actually ran these hate crimes and all that. Okay, so mostly the Sinhalese community, they were helping the Tamil civilians to hide, like people were hiding. Like you guys can ask your elders, they will tell you how the hate crimes are going on. And of course, as revenge for that, the Tamil people went and they killed the Sinhalese civilians who were living in those villages in the border of like northern and southern areas, right? So the people living in villages, like border villages, they were killed. So country turned pretty bad, and this of course turned things into a civil war. And meanwhile, you guys know that LTT claimed that they should be the solitary freedom fighter for liberation fighter for Tamil people, and they sort of like wanted to wipe out the other organizations like TELO and EPRLF and all that. And by 1986-87, by that time, LTT was the sole fighter, was fighting as the armed group. And however, by 1987, Sri Lankan troops managed to defeat LTT up to a reasonable level. Like LTT was like retreating all the way to Jaffna. Okay, so by that time, India got involved in the civil war. Now, since India also has a Tamil population, especially in Chennai, they weren't going to look aside while the war was going on, right? Because the war was going on based on this political problem Tamil people have. And it was the Tamil youth who had taken weapons. And when the war breaks out, it is the Tamil civilians who get affected by the war. So, of course, India was going to get involved in the matter, right? So, India sort of wanted to help the LTT. In fact, like the Indian Secret Service RAW, they actually used to train some of these LTT fighters, right? They used to train all these people. They gave some weapons, and also some regional level politicians gave them weapons and all that to LTT, right? But here's the thing now, since India also had separatist movements going inside their country, now here what's happening is the Tamils in Sri Lanka wanting to break a country for themselves, right? And inside India, they have a lot of groups trying to break a country for themselves as well. So India did not want LTT to form their own country because that may sort of give a bad example and a motivation to separatists inside India. But on the other hand, they didn't want LTT to lose also because they also had a reasonable Tamil population in India, so they wanted to help LTT as well. So India's policy was sort of like, okay, we will help the LTT to a point that government is sort of forced to give a solution, but we won't be helping LTT to like so much that they would get their own country somewhere in between. Okay. So anyways, by 1987, Sri Lankan governments were doing pretty good, and they had successfully managed to push LTT all the way back to Jaffna, right? And they were almost on the brinks of defeating the LTT, right? However, by this time, the Tamil Nadu state government was pushing the Indian central government. At that time, they had Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. And with that pressure, the Indian government decided to get involved. Okay. So what actually happened was when LTT was trapped in Jaffna, so they were surrounded by the army from the land, and they were surrounded by the navy from the sea, right? And none of the aircrafts could go because of the air force. Okay. Then what happened was Indian government sent some boats with food and supplies, saying that we are sending these not to the LTT, but to Tamil people stuck in Jaffna. But in reality, they sort of wanted to help LTT as well, who was stuck at that time. So the Navy did not let those boats pass. Sri Lankan Navy sent them back, right? Then the Indian, so this was like a slap on India because India had been telling J.R. Jayawardena, Rajiv Gandhi had been telling J.R. Jayawardena, sort of like, stop the war and give these people a political solution. JR didn't mind. JR directly told him to mind your own business. This is Sri Lanka's business. Just leave it alone. And when the boats were sent back, that was like a slap on India, and they were heavily offended by that. And they showed their might by simply sending those food and supplies in planes. They sent planes, and from planes, they violated the sovereign borders. Now, you guys remember in Unit 3, we studied the sovereign border. We have external sovereignty. That means we can shoot down any plane or boat that enters our territory without prior notice, right? So these planes came, Indian planes just violated the Sri Lankan sovereign borders, entered into Jaffna, and they dropped those food and supplies from the sky, right? In fact, inside those food and supplies, there was ammunition, bullets and stuff for the LTT to fight back, right? So when JR called and asked Rajiv Gandhi, like, you are violating our sovereignty, we are going to shoot down. Then India said, okay, if you shoot down one of our planes, we are going to bomb your entire country. And obviously, Sri Lankan army is no match to the Indian army, obviously, right? Like the country is like, 30 times bigger than our country. So Rajiv Gandhi said, I tried to negotiate with you. You didn't. You were too arrogant. And now we are going to help the LTT. And finally, JR was willing to, okay, fine. Don't violate our sovereign borders. Don't send the planes. I am ready to talk, sit and talk. Then J.R. Jayawardena and Rajiv Gandhi sat down and they had a talk, right? They discussed what to do. Okay. So this was the agreement between the two. Okay. Rajiv Gandhi asked, okay, JR, this is my question. This is my concern. Okay. You are fighting the war and you are going to defeat the LTT. I understand. Right. But defeating the LTT is not the end of this problem, because LTT was created because there is a political problem. You don't have devolution of power in Sri Lanka. All the power is centralized at the central government, and there's no power authority between central government and local government. From the Jaffna Municipal Council, you have the directly Sri Lankan government, Sri Lanka central government. You need to apply something called devolution of powers to this country. Right? You need a political solution, a constitutional solution. Just defeating LTT is not going to solve the problem. Right? Then JR said, okay, in fact, I'm going to correct you there, Rajiv. I have two problems right now, right? Number one is LTT is not fighting for constitutional change. LTT is fighting for a country, right? And they are a terrorist organization, right? And they are putting bombs in Colombo and all that. So I'm dealing with that. That's a separate problem. And the other problem is addressing this power politics problem in Sri Lanka, constitution amendment. So JR said, let me deal with LTT first. Let me wipe out LTT first, so we don't have to fight a war. There won't be a terrorism problem in Sri Lanka. Then let me give a constitutional solution. I will have a devolution powers in Sri Lanka, but let me wipe out LTT first. Then J.R. Jayawardena, when he said that, Rajiv Gandhi said, okay, you know what? We can't wait until you defeat LTT, until you wipe out LTT. We can't just keep tabs on you to see whether have you finished LTT now. Have you amended your constitution? No, we have other stuff happening, right? So this is the deal. Right now, you amend the constitution, right? Right now you amend the constitution. Right now you add an amendment to the constitution and you introduce devolution of powers to Sri Lanka, right? Create something a government for each province right now. Your problem is LTT, right? You can't have devolution of power while you have LTT. You need to wipe out LTT. Fine. We will give you the Indian army to fight the LTT and wipe out the LTT away. Okay. So J.R. Jayawardena agreed. Hence, they signed Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. The Sinhala medium students, this is what you call Indu Lanka Givisuma, Sama Givisuma, right? Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. So practically the idea is we shall create a provincial council system on the condition that India will take care of the LTT by wiping out the LTT. But it had several terms, right? As you can see, Sri Lanka shall amend the constitution and introduce should be devolution. Devolution of power by establishing a provincial council system. Condition 1. Condition 2, including Tamil as a national language in Sri Lankan constitution and endorsing Sri Lanka as a plural society. That wasn't there in the constitution. Sinhala was the only national language, right? Third one, accepting northern and eastern provinces where you have a majority of Tamil speaking population as the historical homeland of Tamil speaking people. Okay. Then fourth one, unifying northern and eastern provinces temporarily to establish a solitary provincial council. Right? You establish one provincial council for northern and eastern provinces both on a temporary basis. Fifth one, the Indian Peacekeeping Force, IPKF, it will be sent to Sri Lanka and they will handle the LTT. This was the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. So as a result of that, they introduced the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and they introduced the provincial council system to Sri Lanka, right? And the devolution of powers was applied in Sri Lanka for the first time. All this time, we didn't have devolution of powers. We were like France, where we had decentralization only. Right from the government, straight away, you have local government authorities, municipal councils, urban councils, and all that. So with this, they establish a regional power agency in between local government and central governments, right? As the provincial council. Okay, so the constitution did provide that provincial councils exist. This is important. Okay, however, the constitution did not provide for the structure and the content of the provincial councils. Right. So the constitution acknowledged that provincial councils exist in Sri Lanka. Right. The constitution acknowledged the powers of provincial council, but it didn't say the structure. Right? Whether it will have a presidential structure, whether it will have a cabinet structure, how many people will be there, how many ministers will be there, all of that were passed in a parliamentary act. right? Provincial Council Act number 42 of 1987. Okay. So as the Indu-Lanka Peace Accord went, in addition to establishing the Provincial Council, the 13th Amendment also included provisions to accept Tamil as a national language of Sri Lanka. So after 13th Amendment, we have two national languages, Tamil and Sinhala both, right? And also, provincial councils also should declare Sinhala and Tamil both as national languages. All right. Okay. Now the problem is this. Now let me take you back to Unit 4. Let me take you back to Unit 4. You remember in unitary countries. Now what are we going to do here? We are going to keep the unitary status and have devolution of power inside unitary status, right? Devolution of power means that is used inside the unitary status. Devolution, decentralization, deconcentration. We had decentralization all along. Now we are going to upgrade to devolution. All this is applied inside unitary status, right? But do you remember, unitary countries divide power through ordinary law, whatever you pass in the parliament. Federal countries are the ones that give powers to the regional governments through the constitution, the fundamental law of the country. Now there is a small confusion here, because the provincial councils have been introduced to Sri Lanka, but still Sri Lanka is a unitary country. Still Sri Lanka is a unitary country. And provincial councils have been introduced. Now, ideally, if we are still unitary, provincial councils should get power from the ordinary law of the country, general law of the country, through the parliamentary acts. But the constitution acknowledges, and the constitution itself gives powers to the provincial councils. That's a confusion, because if you are recognizing regional governmental units through the constitution, then you're supposed to be federal. Okay. So when they were about to pass the 13th Amendment, something we discussed today came into action, judicial preview power. Some people went and challenged in the court saying, okay, you know what, this is a violation of the constitution, right? Because they are going to pass the 13th Amendment only with a 2/3 majority. Okay. But you can't. If you are recognizing, okay, follow this carefully. If you are recognizing regional governmental units through a constitution, that means you are no longer a unitary country. That means you are transforming into a federal country, right? So remember, under referendums we saw Article 1, 2, 3 can't be amended with a majority in the parliament itself, 2/3 majority. You need a referendum, right? Some people said, okay, you are going to change the unitary status of the country. So you can't pass that with the parliament majority. You need to call a referendum for this, right? JR, you are going to pass a constitutional amendment which compromises the unitary nature of the country. You are sort of going to turn Sri Lanka into a federal country, because provincial councils are acknowledged by the constitution, are recognized by the constitution. So we are going to be federal. So you can't pass this with a 2/3 majority only. You need a referendum. While some people said, no. You have constitution recognize them, but still the central government has all authority, right? Central government is fully powerful. Provincial councils are under the central government. So although it is recognized by the constitution, they don't share the sovereignty power. Provincial councils don't have sovereignty power. They are fully controlled by the parliament, right? So because sovereignty is not shared, we are still unitary. It's just the constitution says that these exist. So it doesn't compromise the unitary nature of the country. Now, which statement of these is correct? What do you think? It's a trick question. We can't decide that. Who decides that? The Supreme Court has to decide, right? Using the judicial preview power. So the 13th Amendment was challenged in the courts, as some people said this has to be decided in a referendum, while the other people said no, this can be decided in the parliament itself, right? Some people said, okay, you know what, it violates Article 2. It says Sri Lanka is a unitary state, number 1. Number 2, it violates Article 3. which says sovereignty of Sri Lanka lies within the people, because if you do this, sovereignty is shared among the central government and the provincial council. So it's not there with the people anymore, right? Then some people said Article 9, because the constitution says that it will give the foremost place to Buddhism. But if you do this, there will be provincial councils with a minority of Buddhist people living in those areas. So they are not going to give priority to Buddhism, right? So you have to change Article 9 also then. So these people said, you need a referendum to pass this. You can't pass it without a referendum. Okay. So this was checked in the parliament. They had a bench of 9 Supreme Court judges, right? 9 Supreme Court judges got together and they went, and the verdict was a split judgment. 5 judges said that it's okay, you don't need a referendum. 2/3 majority in the parliament is enough. 5 judges, while 4 remaining judges said, no, it does compromise the unitary status of the country, so you need a referendum. So 5-4, you can see it's not like a very clear margin, it's a very close margin. While 5 judges said it's okay, 4 judges said, no, it's not okay. The 13th Amendment went through with a 2/3 majority. It didn't go that well in the country, where JVP was like completely against that. LTD was also completely against that, but LTD was somewhat controlled because we had the Indian Army at that time. So JVP was against the Indian Army as well as the 13th Amendment. So they were burning down stuff to show that, they are against that. Even in the political society in Sri Lanka, this was heavily criticized. Even one of our Navy soldiers sort of like attacked Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi while he was leaving Sri Lanka, right? You can find that footage on YouTube, right? So the Sri Lankan Navy soldier, he just hammers Rajiv Gandhi with his rifle because he was so angry that India came and they just forced a power devolution system that we didn't want. Okay, didn't want it, like some didn't want, right? But like we had a problem, but it was bad that they violated our sovereignty and they sort of put this on us on force, and that there were Indian Army soldiers in Northern Province, which was also not very well taken by our people. Okay, so that is the background of provincial councils and the 13th Amendment. And now we are moving on to the much lighter content. Let's see how the structure is fixed. The very easy way to remember this is that because this was forced on us by India, right? So this structure is very similar to India. There are 3 lists. 1 list for central government, 1 list for provincial council, 1 list for mutual powers. This was given to us by India. So it looks very much like, this looks like a buddy version of the Indian power devolution system. And the other thing is, this is a mini cabinet system in each province. In each province, you have the provincial council. Whoever has a majority becomes the chief minister instead of the prime minister. And the nominal executive duties are done by the provincial governor, right? So it's like a small cabinet system in each province. And the power devolution is similar to the Indian semi-federal format. So if you keep that in mind, it's going to be not that hard, right? Looking into the provincial council structure, okay? Looking into the provincial council structure, we can see that the governmental power given to these regional levels, right? There was the first idea of the basic idea of devolution is to give powers to the regional governmental units without compromising the unitary nature. You will still be a unitary country, sovereignty still be with the central government, but the powers are given to different regions based on devolution, right? So that's what 13th Amendment introduced. Now, as I mentioned before, the 13th Amendment was given to us by sort of by India. And as a result of that, we can see that this is very identical to the Indian structure. Okay, so the powers are divided under 3 lists, and it is a mini cabinet system. In terms of the executive, it is like a mini cabinet system everywhere. In every province, you have a provincial council and you have an election, you choose members of the provincial council. And whoever has a majority, that leader gets to become the chief minister. Four of his other ministers get to be the other members of the board of ministers. And the nominal executive's duties are done by the provincial governor, and that governor is appointed by the president. Okay. So the lawmaking procedure is like the same as the central government, right? So chief minister and the board of ministers shall make decisions and the provincial council has to approve. So chief minister and the board of ministers are the real executive of the province. Their decisions are approved by the legislature, and final approval is given by the provincial governor. Governor signs and the approval is given. Okay. Now the number of ministers in the council, now this is something even the teacher's guide doesn't exactly give you the accurate detail. It has 4 ministers, right? Education, health, transport, and agriculture. These are the 4 ministers. And you have the chief minister. So in total, you have 5 ministers. Okay, so you have 5 ministers, including the chief minister. Teacher's guide says 5 ministers and the chief minister. That's inaccurate, right? 4 ministers and the chief minister. It's 5 including the chief minister. Okay, so these things you have to be very careful. So I've left a box here for you all to draw the lawmaking structure, right? How you have the provincial council, how the chief minister and 4 other ministers, the real executive, make decisions. Their decisions have to be approved by the provincial council. Provincial council's approved decision should be signed by the governor. Provincial governor as a final approval, like we used to do in Salisbury. Governor general used to give final approval like that, and the governor is appointed by the president. So you can use this box to draw something about that. Right. Then main features of the 13th Amendment. It provides a constitutional recognition for provinces. But back in the day, we used to have provinces, but Constitution did not recognize provinces. Constitution recognized districts. The 7th Amendment showed that these are the districts. Sri Lanka has 25 districts. But the 9 provinces of Sri Lanka did not have a constitutional recognition. But under the 13th Amendment, each province was given a provincial council. And this was accepted. Right? Then they established a provincial council. Provincial councils were established as a semi-national governmental unit, like semi-national. That means that you have a national government, the central government, the president and the parliament, and you have the local government levels. You have like the municipal councils and urban councils and all that. So in the middle, you have a semi-national governmental unit. That means that you have the central government, and this is like a semi-national, not entirely national government, but this is in the semi level, like the provincial level, regional level government, right? And then, okay, here we go. Third one, we can see how the powers are divided according to the structure of the Indian system, right? You have a provincial council list. This is similar to the state list in India. Then you have a closed powers list. This is similar to the reserve list in India. And you have the concurrent powers list. This is similar to the mutual powers list in India, right? So provincial council powers means the powers that are given to all, powers given to provincial council, all provincial councils. Then you have 16 powers that are given specifically for central government only. They are closed. That list is closed for the provincial councils. And there are concurrent powers. These powers can be exercised by both central government and the provincial councils both. Okay. Right. So you have to keep in mind that the first list includes like whatever the powers that are there in the first list. Provincial council has solitary power and central government can't do anything about those, right? Central government can't do anything about those unless a provincial council requests. Okay, let's be clear with these 3 lists. Closed list, straightforward. Central government only. Provincial council has no say. Okay. Provincial council list means these belongs to provincial council. Central government can't pass laws unless a provincial council asks. If a provincial council says, hey, parliament, we have a power, we don't know how to do this, can you pass this? If the request is made, they may make. Concurrent powers means that central government and provincial council both can do, but you have to update. Central government is doing something, you have to update the provincial council, we are doing this. Provincial council is doing something, you have to update the central government, hey, we are doing this, like that. Okay. Anyways, there are other features as well, but before getting into that, I think we have to sort of like be thorough with whatever we studied thus far, right? Um, so we'll read this part first. Warner, do you still have your microphone issue? It's been a while since you last read the lesson. Too bad. Yes, I see that's a problem. Okay, let me get someone else. Tasha, what about you? Does your mic work? Nashita, what about you? Can you read? No? Okay, who else then? Rashid?
Sure. 13th Amendment. Background. As a result of the divided rule theory used by the British colonial rules by the time of independence of colony, the Sinhalese and Tamil divide and rule theory used by the British colonial rulers by the time of independence of colony, the Sinhalese and Tamil communities were facing political conflict and political party of Ilangai Tamil Arasu Katchi formed in 1949. At the basic motive of turning Ceylon to a federal country as a solution for this conflict. Therefore, this party was generally known as Federal Party. As discussed above, the Federal Party leader V. Selvanayagam attempted to enter into several political solutions which Sri Lankan government had, and no attempt was successful. As a result, by mid-1970s, Tamil youth group in North decided to form armed groups such as LTTE and early 1980s. The violent activities of these armed groups became more frequent and Sri Lankan government had to locate the government forces in northern provinces to maintain law and order. Soldiers died in Jaffna as their truck ran over a landmine. This incident fueled a violent outbreak within the Sinhalese community, which resulted in hate crimes and the time had did not make execute any suspects. This incident is known as the Black July. Following this, a civil war broke out between the government troops and the Tamil armed groups. Meanwhile, the LTTE claimed that they should be considered the solitary liberation fighters for the Tamil communities and demanded other armed groups to deny this demand, and LTTE almost wiped out these groups. By 1987, the civil war was between the government troops and the LTTE. It is important to analyze the role of India entered the civil war, given that India too has a concern to India and supporting Tamil armed groups was frequently done. However, India did not want to see the formation of separate state for the Tamils as they could fuel the separated movements within India. Therefore, India followed a policy to support Tamil and armed groups to a level where the Sri Lankan government would be pushed to provide a political solution for Tamils, yet not a level a separate Tamil state would be created. In 1987, the Sri Lankan government troops successfully managed to push LTTE to Jaffna and almost managed to defeat LTTE. By this time, under the pressure of Tamil Nadu state government, the Indian central government attempted to convince the Sri Lankan government to abort the progress of the government troops. As the Sri Lankan government refused, the Indian government forcefully violated the external sovereignty of the Sri Lanka by sending aid for LTTE in unauthorized aircrafts. By this point, the Sri Lankan government was willing to negotiate, and as a result, the Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and Sri Lankan President J.R. Jayawardena signed the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. This agreement included following terms. 1. Sri Lanka shall amend the constitution and introduce in devolution of power by establishing a provincial council system. 2. Included Tamil as a national language in Sri Lankan constitution and endorsing Sri Lanka as a plural society. 3. Attempting northern and eastern provinces, where a majority of population speak Tamil, as a historical homeland of Tamil-speaking people. 4. Unifying northern and eastern provinces temporarily and establishing a solitary provincial council. 5. The Indian Peacekeeping Force (IPKF) being sent to the Sri Lanka to handle the LTTE. Therefore, the 13th Amendment was added to the constitution and provincial council system was established by in Sri Lanka. Through this, devolution of powers was applied in Sri Lanka for the first time. The 13th Amendment included provisions regarding the power division between the central government and provincial council. However, the constitution did not provide for the structure and the content of the provincial council as it was decided through the Parliamentary Act number 42 of 1987. In addition to establishing the provincial council system, the 13th Amendment also included provisions to accept Tamil as a national language of Sri Lanka. Therefore, alongside of provincial councils, Sinhala and Tamil both were declared as national languages. However, the 13th Amendment, the Provincial Council system, and the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord are considered as quite controversial in Sri Lankan politics. During this time, the 13th Amendment was heavily criticized and even resulted in riots around Sri Lanka. Also, many legal arguments were raised on the constitutionality of the amendment. 1. The argument that Provincial Council system violates Article 2 of the Constitution, which provides that Sri Lanka is a unitary state. 2. The argument that the Provincial Council system violates Article 3 of the Constitution, which provides that the sovereignty of the Sri Lankan lies within the people. 3. The argument that Provincial Council system violates Article 9 of the Constitution, which provides that the Republic of Sri Lanka shall be foremost placed to Buddhism. Even the above agreement, the constitutionality of the amendment was challenged in the Supreme Court. Therefore, the bench of 9 Supreme Court justices examined the draft of the 13th Amendment. The final verdict was a split judgment as 5 justices declared that the amendment could be passed with a 2/3 majority and a referendum was not necessary as provincial council do not compromise the unitary nature, the foremost place for Buddhism or the sovereignty of the people. However, the 4 remaining justices disagreed and declared that the referendum was necessary as the above provisions are compromised by 13th Amendment. Since the majority of the justices agreed, the verdict of the Supreme Court provided that the 13th Amendment could be passed with 2/3 majority in the Parliament only. Therefore, according to the judgment, the 13th Amendment is a devolution of power within a unitary state.
Okay, thanks, Rashid. That was a recap of what I explained, right? Now let's move ahead with the structure. Okay. Sarah, can you take from here?
The structure of the provincial council. The idea of devolution is to assure that the government power is given to regional levels in the same format of executive, legislature, judiciary without compromising the unitary status. Therefore, the 13th Amendment also took steps to establish executive, legislature, and judicial powers in the regional level. In terms of the judiciary, Provincial High Court was established to handle appeals at a provincial level before the Court of Appeal. In terms of the legislature and the executive, a provincial council was established as the provincial legislature, while the member who has the majority support in the provincial council is chosen as the provincial chief minister. 4 other ministers are appointed to complete the board of ministers, and the role of the nominal executive is done by the provincial governor, who is appointed by the president. This shows that the 13th Amendment has established a regional level cabinet format in each province. It should be noted that provincial council also have the same lawmaking procedure as the central government. The chief minister and the board of the ministers shall make decisions while the provincial council should approve the decisions. Also, it should be noted that a law passed in the provincial council is known as a statute. The maximum number of ministers can be appointed in the provincial council is 4: education, health, transport, and agriculture. Therefore, the real executive of the provincial council is consisted of a total of 5 ministers, including the chief minister.
Right, thanks, sir. There was an important point, right? When the provincial council passes a bill, you don't call that a law. What is the word used instead? A statute, right? It is known as a statute. These are the things they ask for MCQs, and these are the things you need to write in essay answers as well. Okay, right. So I hope up to that point it is clear. Main features. So as we were discussing before, the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment recognized provinces through the Constitution, right? Because back in the day, before the 13th Amendment, although provinces existed in Sri Lanka, the Constitution didn't mention anything about that, right? So got some recognition. So we check that part. This is like one of the basic features, not very complex features of the 13th Amendment. Then, of course, they received a semi-national level of government. We discussed that, and we discussed the 3 tasks, how tasks are divided under 3 lists as well. We discussed that also. Then we can see how that is similar to the Indian federal system, because this was sort of forced on us by the Indian Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. Then each list of powers is specifically mentioned in the Constitution, right? The Constitution says provincial council list, right? And it lists out 37 powers. Then it says closed powers, which are not available to the provincial councils. They list out 16 powers. Then these are concurrent powers, and they list out 36 powers. So they don't just randomly say, like, you know, basic stuff goes to provincial councils, important stuff goes to closed list. They don't say that. They specifically list out all the powers. Okay. Then that's why that you have to sort of be accurate with the technicality of these terms, right? Now, first of all, the first list. The first list includes powers such as law and order, provincial planning, supervising local government authorities, housing schemes, all the basic stuff, right? And the provincial council has the authority to make, what are the laws? Not laws, statutes. To make statutes regarding any of these areas. Okay. And however, whatever the provincial council passes requires the approval of the governor. Okay, final approval should be given by the governor. Chief minister and the 4 ministers decide the statute, and the provincial council passes, it becomes a statute, and the governor has to sign, then only it becomes legal. Okay. And the parliament, the central government parliament, has no power to pass any laws regarding those matters in the provincial council list. Okay. Okay. Unless all provincial councils mutually agree. Okay. This is how it works. Now, you have to follow me here. Now, if all the provincial councils get together, right? If all provincial councils get together and tell, okay, parliament, all 9 provincial councils are here. Can you pass this law for us? We are mutually asking you, can you pass this law for us? In that case, parliament can pass a law regarding those provincial council list matters. If not, parliament can't be like, okay, I don't care, whatever you want, I'm going to pass. No. It is given to the provincial council. Provincial council can make statutes, central government can't. Unless all the provincial councils get together and ask here, can you pass this for us? Okay. But imagine something like this. Imagine the central government, okay, imagine I am the president and I am about to pass a law with the parliament, okay? And I realize, okay, you know what? This is a matter in the provincial council, so I can't pass that. But then imagine you guys are chief ministers of different provincial councils. All of you all get together and be like, okay, mutually, we are asking you, can you pass this? In that case, I can pass that, In that case, I can pass that law because all 9 provincial councils have requested me. Then I get it passed in the parliament. Imagine something like this. Imagine Warner is the chief minister of Northwestern province, Northwestern, one of the provincial councils. Only he would come and ask me, sir, can you pass this law for me? Then I go through that. I'll be like, oh, okay, Warner, this is an area that is given to you. I don't have power to pass this in the parliament, right? Then Warner will be like, okay, sir, what about like if we ask you? But then again, then I'm going to say, Warner, in that case, all 9 provinces have to ask me. Or this is only you asking me, right? Your provincial council is asking me. One provincial council asking me, I can't pass this for the entire country. However, since Warner, you are asking me to pass this law, I'll pass it. But that is only applicable to your province, understand? Because only you asked. Only you asked as a provincial council, sir, can you pass this regarding a provincial council matter? That is not in my hands, right? Only you requested for Northwestern province. So I'll pass. That is only applicable to your province only. It could be like 2 or 3 also. Maybe imagine, okay, Warner is the Northwestern province chief minister. Hishmat is the Eastern province chief minister, right? And Rifki would be the Southern province chief minister. All 3 of them come and ask, okay, sir, can you pass this law in the parliament? I'll be like, okay, guys, this is a provincial council matter. I don't have power to pass this, right? If all 9 of you all ask, yes, I can pass it for the entire country. But now that is only the 3 of you all asking me, I'll pass this. But it's only applicable to the 3 of your provinces only. This is applicable to Northwestern, Eastern, and Southern, because that's where you guys are from. Your provincial council is asking, you all will get it. Okay. Let's say Hishma is the chief minister of the central province or Sabaragamu province. In that area, this law has no applicability. Why? She never asked. She never requested. Is that part clear? Up to that point? Right. If that is clear, then think about this. Okay, imagine Warner comes to me, sir, can you pass this? Okay. I'll be like, okay, this is provincial council matter. I can't pass it. It's not my authority. Warner will be like, okay, I am requesting you to pass. They'll be like, okay, if all 9 of you all request, I can pass it for the entire country, but only you are requesting, right? So I'll pass it, but that is only applicable to you. But there is a way I can make this law applicable to the entire country. Okay. Now imagine there are 8 chief ministers here in 8 other provinces. Only Warner, who is the chief minister of Northwestern province, Wayamba Palate, right? Wayamba Palate, Northwestern province chief minister. Only he is the one asking me, sir, can you pass this? And according to the law, I can pass a law, but that is only applicable to Warner's territory, right? His provincial council, because only they are asking that, right? But imagine that, think of me as like a sort of like a jerk president, right? Imagine that I'm in bad terms with, let's say I'm in bad terms with Hishma, who is the chief minister of Sabaragamu province, okay? Now I need to pass this on Hishma's territory as well, but she never requested, okay? Only Warner requested. So if I pass it, it will be only applicable to Warner's territory. But there is a way I can make this law applicable to the entire country. It's a tough question, but if any of you all want to guess, I'll give you a chance. There is a tool I can use. If I get it passed in the parliament with a certain qualification. Someone's asking emergency law. No, you don't have to go that extreme. Something to do with numbers. 2/3 majority. Exactly, Warner. Correct. Now, Warner asked me, can you pass this? If I pass it with a normal majority, that is applicable to Warner's territory only. But if I pass it with a 2/3 majority, that is applicable to all provincial councils, whether you asked for it or not. Okay, so this is also done as to be used as a political tactic, right? Because northern and eastern provinces will always not be in good terms with the government, right? So there will be certain provincial councils. There will be certain provincial councils that are friendly with the president, right? Now imagine in my party, Warner is one of my closest people. I want to sort of overrule, I want to pass a law regarding one of the matters in the provincial council list, right? First of all, I'll be like, okay, let's see. Now, let's say I have a rivalry with Hishman, so I'm like, I want to pass a law in like sort of like attacking Hishma's provincial council. Now, Hishma never requested, can you pass this, right? So I'm going to tell Warner, you are my friend. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to pass a motion in your provincial council and send me requesting me to pass this particular law. Then I'm going to pass it in the parliament with a 2/3 majority. And that is applicable to everywhere in the country. Now you see why this provincial council is relatively weak and what sort of tactics have been used by J.R. Jayawardena to make sure that the central government still comes on top. Understand, right? So that's how provincial council list works, right? So you can pass a law if all provincial councils mutually agree, or if one provincial council or a few requests, it is applicable to their territory only. But in that case also, if the parliament passes a 2/3 majority, that is applicable to the entire country, right? Can't get more simple than these guys. I've simplified it the best I can, right? The second list includes powers such as national security, foreign affairs, telecommunication, television, broadcasting, obviously, right? There's nothing much to study there. Obviously, the big ones, big guns, airports, harbors, immigration, completely prohibited to provincial councils. Out of the question, completely. Central government handles, no question there. No complications, nothing. Central government handles, provincial council, just shut up and sit, right? Then the third list, mutual powers. Here you have like education, higher education, social services, agriculture, sports, transport, road development, all these things are shared powers or mutual powers. That means that these policies can be made by both, like either the central government can pass a law or the provincial council can pass a statute. Okay. So the only thing is that you have to seek the opinion of the other government. Like if the provincial council is about to do something, pass a statute, you'll be like, hey, we want to let you know that we are passing a statute. What do you think? Right? And then the central government also, we are about to pass a law. What do you think? Provincial council, 9 provincial councils, what do you all think? If there are any opinions, just let me know. Right? But obviously you can see that. Now, okay, imagine the opinion, right? Now I am the president. You guys are chief ministers in provincial councils, right? I'll be like, okay, there are certain things like powers such as taking intervals in the class should be mutual powers, right? You all also can decide when to have an interval. I also can decide when to have an interval, but we have to seek the opinion. I'm going to say that. But in reality, what's going to happen is you guys would make a decision and tell me, sir, we have decided to have an interval. What do you think, right? I can simply turn that down, right? Because I am the teacher. I'd be like, oh, yeah, no, you're not having a break right now. But on the other hand, when I say that, okay, I've decided to have an interval, or I've decided to end the interval, what do you all think? You all may say, sir, we want more interval. I'll be like, no, come back. You understand, although it says you should seek the opinion of the other government, other level, the central government has the power to turn down the provincial council decisions in practicality. That's how it works, right? Even at home, if you say like, the parents would seek the opinions of the children should seek the opinion of the parents. Parents' opinion don't really come as opinion. It's sort of like a compulsory order you're supposed to follow. On the other hand, although parents say, I'll consider your opinion, it's merely an opinion. Decision making is up to them. So that's the situation that's there. Other than that, this is the important thing, the residual powers. What are residual powers? Unmentioned powers. You can't make 3 lists and conclude all the powers in the world, right? There still will be some powers that are not mentioned in any of these lists. So those powers are given to the central government. Like, you mentioned provincial council powers, you mentioned central government powers, you mentioned mutual powers. Anything else goes to central government. That's that feature. Okay. Okay, now these are the restrictions. These are the restrictions on the provincial councils, right? These are the restrictions that are given. Now, first of all, provincial council, why was provincial councils introduced? It was introduced because you wanted to solve this power problem, right? Power division problem. And LTT was fighting for power, right? If this was like a proper effective system, LTT would have taken this and Prabhakaran could have like contested and become the chief minister. But like they just kicked it off and they said like we are going to continue the war. Okay. And it was criticized by the LTT, who was like the main role, who played the main role in the power politics and the civil war in Sri Lanka. And it was heavily criticized pretty much by everyone. It's very difficult to find someone who is okay with provincial councils, someone who says provincial councils are good, unless that the person is someone who works in the provincial council or a member of the provincial council, someone who takes salaries from there. Other than that, pretty much everyone criticizes this. Okay. So let's see what sort of restrictions it has. First of all, you can see powers mentioned in the clause list are completely prohibited for provincial councils. Okay, out of question. Secondly, powers mentioned in the concurrent list, which means mutual powers, provincial councils have to seek the approval, like it says opinion, although it says opinion, technically that is approval, right? So unless the central government likes, you can't really go ahead with that. Then thirdly, even when it comes to the provincial council powers, as you can see that, the central government could pass something with a 2/3 majority and overrule that, as we saw before. And also, these land powers and police powers, provincial council list has land powers and police powers. Provincial council can decide what to do with their land. Provincial council can administer their police stations, right? But those powers are not practically given. This is another violation of constitutionalism here. Constitution says provincial council should have control over land. Provincial council should have control over the police, but in practicality, those two powers are not given. Okay. Then, of course, provincial councils handle the supervision of local government authorities, right? Local government authorities, municipal councils and all that. Back in the day, these were supervised by the central government itself, but now the supervision powers are given to the, the provincial council. Okay, so they have the power to grant additional powers also. If they want, they can give more powers to the local government, but they can't remove existing powers. Okay. I can see like participants are dropping one by one. This must be difficult, but like, let's finish this part. Anyway, the recording will be uploaded. Okay. Right. Now let's see what sort of a role the governor has. Okay. So the governor is appointed by the president. Governor is appointed by the president, and the governor can only be removed also by the president. Okay. Now, does this remind you of the British Governor General, who was appointed by the Queen, who was completely outside Sri Lanka, and who could only be removed by the Queen only, even if he passed an impeachment? So it's just like that. President who's in the central government sends the governor and can only be removed by the president, even if an impeachment motion passed in the provincial council. Okay. So there are 3 duties expected of the governor. First of all, he's a coordinator between the president and the provincial council. But in reality, he is the one who does spying work. He keeps spying on the provincial council in practicality, but he does the coordination, let's say that in a professional manner. Then he provides consultation to the members to the provincial council if necessary. If the members are sort of struggling to get a law done, you can give them consultation. Then fulfilling the role of the nominal executive. Right, nominal executive duties are also done, like dissolving the provincial council, calling the provincial council, summoning the provincial council, postponing the provincial council, taking the chair, right, granting approval. So sort of like whatever the Governor General did under Salisbury, right? Then most of these I discussed before, so the restrictions they have. Okay. So you can see that provincial council have the power to make statutes on the 37 subjects given under the provincial council list. Okay, but what is the problem? Each statute requires the approval of the governor. If the governor doesn't sign, everything is in the drain. So this is like the Governor General's powers, like what made the Salisbury Parliament so weak is one of the reasons, right? So, and another thing is, the governor could say, I don't feel like signing this because I feel like this statute is against the constitution. When you send it to the governor could say, I'm not going to sign this because I feel like this is against the constitution. Constitutionality is a problem here. In that case, it should be examined. The statute should be examined by the Supreme Court, right? And Supreme Court says, okay, it's all right, Governor, you have to sign. Or the Supreme Court can say it is unconstitutional, Governor, your decision was right, you don't have to sign this. Okay. This means, okay, here's a keyword. This means Sri Lankan provincial councils are subjected to judicial review power without the P. You see, provincial council passes this. Then the governor says, okay, I feel like this is not constitutional, let's ask the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can reverse that. So that means it is subject to judicial review power. Further makes the provincial councils even weaker, right? And the other thing is, although the governor is sort of considered as a part of the provincial council, you know the governor is directly appointed by the president. So practically, president appoints 9 governors to the 9 provinces, so he can keep him as a puppet. So president can directly influence any provincial council. I mean, like the guy who gives this validity to any law passing this provincial council is appointed by the president directly, right? So that's literally president controlling the entire thing, right? Then of course, Article 154A says, if the president notices, okay, this is important. If the president notices the administration of a certain province has failed, right? If the president notices, that means if the president observes, in his opinion, if he feels like, okay, the administration of this province has failed, that means, just look at this. He can take the complete authority of the provincial council either to his hand, or he can say, okay, governor, take care of this province. So with one word, he can say, okay, provincial council, go home. Chief minister, go home. Other 4 ministers, go home. I'll be handling this province from today onwards. Or my governor will handle this province today onwards, right? Or simply he can say, okay, from today onwards, this is controlled by the parliament, central government parliament. Now you see, in India also they have this, right? In India also you can declare an emergency situation and get the central government to handle everything. So simply this Article 154A makes this power division system completely meaningless. It's just president's opinion if the president feels like. Now here's the case. I'll just tell you another advanced point. In India, having this is okay. Why? Indian president is nominal executive. Indian president is a nominal executive, right? But our president is like so freaking powerful, and you tell him that you can just take over the entire authority of a provincial council on your own, and that doesn't add up. Although it works for India, because in India, the president is nominal, right? Let's see, what are the other restrictions they have? Okay, the previous point I mentioned, right? Provincial council or a few provincial councils can request, right? A few provincial councils can request, can you pass this law, right? To be applicable to this province, but can you pass this law? And if they pass that law, that is only applicable to the provinces which made the request. Also, on the other hand, they can pass it with a 2/3 majority, and in that case, it is applicable to all provinces, which we discussed before. Okay. And the concurrent list is for mutual for both governments, but provincial council has to seek the approval of the central government, right? And the parliament has the power to change a statute. See, this is like really useless, right? Provincial council passes a statute, and if the parliament passes something against that statute with a 2/3 majority, that statute is considered gone. This statute is reversed. Imagine, Hishma, in your province, you pass a statute, right? And in the parliament, the next day I pass a parliamentary act against that with a 2/3 majority, and the statute is gone, deleted. And another thing, you remember, although the constitution acknowledges the provincial council, the powers are given under this act. It's a parliamentary act. So they can simply change the structure of any provincial council. They can remove people, they can increase the number of members, reduce the number of members, so they can meddle with the structure. Okay? That can be changed that way. All right. So other than that, just keep in mind that there's something called the Financial Commission. These things are very basic, very minor, right? There's something called the Financial Commission. That means that This commission is established to make sure every provincial council get money equally. These things you don't have to study that hard, just keep in mind, right? So you put the chairman of the central bank, secretary of the treasury, and two other members appointed by the president. These four people, this financial commission will make sure, right? Will make sure that every provincial council gets equal amount of money. That's their duty. That's why they are there. And of course, you remember the Public Service Commission, right? That what the commission that does administration, appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations. Yeah, so 13th Amendment said for each province, you need to have a mini Public Service Commission, Provincial Public Service Commission. Okay, that also has 3 members appointed by the governor. Okay, just to handle the provincial level of public service. That's all. Then I have a small list of what sort of criticisms and positives, which is very basic. I know it's a lot, but you'll have to take this in, right? But it's not that hard. If you understood the rationale, it's not that hard. Okay, right. Main features. We'll quickly finish reading the main features, then we are done, right? Right. Okay. Rifki, can you read?
Yes, sir. Main features of 13th Amendment, providing a constitutional recognition for provinces. Prior to the 13th Amendment, the 1978 Constitution had recognized administrative districts under the 7th Amendment. However, the administrative provinces were recognized for the first time under the 13th Amendment. Establishing provincial councils as a semi-national governmental unit. In Sri Lanka, only 2 levels of government existed for a long period of time. In addition to the central government, in the national level, only local government authority existed since the British colonial times. The 13th Amendment established the provincial council as the governmental unit in between the national and local governmental layers as a semi-national unit, dividing tasks and powers under 3 lists. The 13th Amendment divides the powers and tasks among the central government and regional governments under 3 lists. Provincial Council List 37, Closed Powers List 16, and Concurrent Powers List 36. The first list includes the powers and tasks allowed for the provincial councils, while the second list includes powers and tasks exclusive to the central government, hence closed for exercised by both central government and provincial councils. It can be observed that the Sri Lankan provincial council system is quite similar to the structure of the Indian federal system. This is mainly due to the fact that the provincial council system was introduced to Sri Lanka as a result of the influence of India in the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. Each list of powers being specifically mentioned in the Constitution. The first list includes powers such as law and order, provincial planning, supervising local government authorities, housing schemes, agriculture, etc. The Provincial Council has the authority to make statutes regarding any of these areas. However, it should be noted that of these statutes require the approval of the governor. Also, the Parliament has no power to pass laws regarding these subjects unless all provincial councils mutually agree. The second list includes powers such as national security, foreign affairs, telecommunication, television, and broadcasting, airports and harbors, immigration, etc. These areas are completely prohibited for provincial councils as the solitary lawmaking power is with the central government. The third list includes powers such as education, higher education, social services, agriculture, sports, transport, road development, etc. These powers are known as shared powers or mutual powers, as they can be exercised by both the central government and the provincial councils. However, it should be noted that when exercising these powers, any government should seek the opinion of the other government. If there are any residual powers excluded in all the above lists, they belong to the central government. Powers of the provincial councils having restrictions. It should be noted that provincial councils have many restrictions on their powers, which has resulted in heavy criticisms, as well as the main reason to be rejected by the LTTE as an effective solution for the civil war. Firstly, all the powers mentioned in the closed list are completely prohibited for provincial councils. Secondly, all the powers included in the concurrent list are open for the provincial council also, although it is necessary to grant the approval of the central government before passing a statute. Thirdly, even when it comes to the list of provincial council powers, the provincial council has to exercise them under certain restrictions. Additionally, it should be noted that certain powers included in the provincial council list, land powers and police powers, are not practically given to provincial councils. Supervision of local government authorities being done by provincial councils. Prior to the 13th Amendment, the local government authorities were supervised by the central government itself. However, after the 13th Amendment, the provincial councils have been granted the power to supervise, dissolve, and grant additional powers to local government authorities. However, removing existing powers is not allowed. The role of the governor. For each province, a governor shall be appointed by president. This governor can only be removed by the president, even if an impeachment is passed in the provincial councils. There are 3 duties expected from the governor: coordinating the president and the provincial council, providing consultation to the members of the provincial council if necessary, fulfilling the role of a nominal executive. Certain powers are given to the governor to exercise on sole discretion, while other powers should be exercised on the advice of the chief minister.
Right. Anyone willing to take it from that point onwards? Asha?
Yes, sir. Restrictions of the powers of provincial council. Although the provincial council has the power to have statutes on the 37 subjects in the provincial council list, each statute requires the approval of the governor. The governor has the power to either approve or refuse the statute. Other than the governor also has the power to request the provincial council to reconsider the statute. In such case, the constitutionality of the statute should be examined by the Supreme Court, and if it is considered as constitutional, the governor should grant his approval. Even the power of the governor over the statute of the provincial council, it is also important to notice that the fact that the governor is directly appointed by the president, therefore the president has the power to directly influence the statute-making process of the provincial council. As provided by Article 150A, if the president notices that the administration of a certain province has failed, the president shall take the complete authority of the provincial council to his hand or to the hands of the governor, hand over the complete authority of the provincial council to the parliament. If a provincial council or a few provincial councils request, the central government may pass a law on a provincial council subject. However, this law is applicable only to the provinces which made the request. However, if the parliament passes the law with a 2/3 majority in the above case, the relevant law is applicable to all provinces. Since the concurrent list is mutual for both central and provincial governments, the provincial council have to seek the approval of the central government in such matters. The parliament has the power to change a statute passed by provincial council with a 2/3 majority. Act number 42 of 1987 provides that every provincial council should decide their policy framework based on the national policy framework of the central government. All the provincial councils are recognized and empowered by the Constitution. The structures of each provincial council is decided by Act number 42 of 1987, which can be amended with a 2/3 majority of the parliament.
There's only one more
So
page.
should I read that as well?
Yes, just one more page.
The Financial Commission, the 13th Amendment also provides establishment of the Financial Commission, which is connected to provincial councils. The purpose of the council is to handle the distribution of finances and resources among provincial councils, as well as to assure that the finances and resources are equally divided among all provinces equally as provided by Article 154J. This commission is consisted of the chairman of the central bank, the secretary of treasury, 2 members appointed by the
You have a connection problem?
No, sir. Provincial Public Service Commission. This is another important feature of provincial councils. According to 13th Amendment, the administration power over the public sector is with the governor. However, the 13th Amendments also provide for the Provincial Public Service Commission. The governor can delegate his powers over the public sector to this commission. This commission is consisted of 3 members appointed by the governor. This commission was also established by the Provincial Council at number 42 of 1982.
Yeah, this part also, then we are done.
Criticisms against the 13th Amendment and provincial council system with the lack of reasonable power and inhabitancy, the additional cost of administration, dependency on the central government, key powers being in the hands of the government. So, failing to address the various reasons of introduction, creating complications with the unity states of Sri Lanka. Positive features of provincial council, allowing revolution of power in Sri Lanka, allowing devolution of power in Sri Lanka for the first time, applying symmetrical power sharing, providing a platform for regional level politicians, being a political academy for junior politicians.
I think it's pretty straightforward, whatever the criticism that's there, right? Should be various, it should be main. Failing to address the main reason of introduction. It was introduced to solve the war, right? But it failed to finish the war. It went on for another 30 years. Also, symmetrical power sharing means in Sri Lanka, all provincial councils are given equal powers. Now in UK, the different regions are given different powers. In Sri Lanka, it's symmetrical. So it's a good feature. And also, it's a good political academy for junior politicians. Before running for the parliament, you can go to the provincial council and get like a training how to do all this legislative work. Right. It's a long lesson, but good that we covered. Go through the recording, go through the note. And other than that, right, you will catch this well in the revision if you study this. Okay. It's one of the main areas questions can come, and let's see what can be done in the revision.